The desert night was alive with light. A haze of gold and neon shimmered across the Las Vegas skyline as Sheriff Darren McCall stepped out of a black SUV. His uniform was gone. In its place, a dark tailored suit that fit his broad shoulders and the quiet authority he carried everywhere. The doorman recognized the badge pin on his lapel and gave a polite nod. Darren didn't return it. Tonight, he wasn't the law. Tonight, he was just a man walking into temptation. Inside the Bellagio, everything smelled of money and foreign perfume. A private suite awaited him on the 33rd floor, reserved under a name he'd only seen written on gold stationery. Amira Alzara, the Sheik of Dubai's youngest daughter, a woman whispered about in the circles of wealth and power like a myth. She'd come to the U.S. to attend a global security conference. Somehow, through one discreet conversation and 2 exchanged messages, she had requested a meeting with him. Not the governor, not the federal liaison, but a sheriff from a dusty Texas county. He wasn't sure why he said yes. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the sound of her voice over phone, low, deliberate, and edged with something dangerous. Maybe it was because for once, someone spoke to him as if the badge didn't define him. When he entered the suite, the first thing he noticed wasn't the woman. It was the silence. A grand piano stood near the balcony, its lid closed. Golden light spilled across the floor-to-ceiling windows. Then she appeared, tall, elegant, dressed in flowing ivory silk, a diamond glimmering at her throat. Her eyes were dark, almond-shaped, sharp as a blade, yet soft enough to draw him in. "Sheriff McCall," she said, her accent lilting like music. "Or should I call you Darren?" He gave a faint smile. "Depend who's asking." "I'm not the press," she replied, stepping closer. "You don't need to hide behind titles with me." The corner of his mouth twitched. "And you don't need to pretend you're just another diplomat." She laughed quietly, a warm, full sound that filled the space. "Touché." He accepted the glass of bourbon she offered and watched her pour herself a ruby-red drink. For a moment, neither spoke. The tension wasn't awkward. It was charged, like the quiet before lightning hits. Amira broke the silence. "Do you know why I asked to meet you, Darren?" He shook his head. "Because when I watched your interview after the flood, you didn't sound like a man doing a job. You sounded like someone carrying a wound." He didn't respond. Few people ever noticed that. "I see that same wound in the mirror," she said softly. "Power can cage you, you know. The world bows to you, but you're not allowed to breathe." He finally met her gaze. "You make it sound like freedom's a sin." "In my world," she said, "it is." For the first time that night, he smiled, a real one. It disarmed her more than he realized. Hours passed. Talk became laughter. Laughter melted into silence. They sat on the balcony, the desert air warm against their skin. She told him stories of Dubai's endless skyline and how even wealth could feel like prison bars. He spoke about Texas, the dust, the loneliness, the burden of being a hero to people who didn't know how broken he really was. When she reached for his hand, it didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable. "Darren," she whispered, "you're not like the men I know." He looked at her, really looked. "And you," he murmured, "make silence feel dangerous." The lights of the strip flickered below them, the world spinning without mercy. By midnight, they were standing by the piano, her perfume mixing with the scent of bourbon and fear. She kissed him once, slow and certain, as if she already knew the risk of falling for a man who never truly belonged anywhere. He closed his eyes, wishing, for the first time in years, that he could stop hiding. But he couldn't, not yet. When dawn approached, he left her suite without a word. Her voice lingered behind him like smoke. "Come back soon, Sheriff," she said, smiling faintly. "Maybe next time you'll let me see who you really are." He didn't answer. He couldn't, because if she ever did see who he really was, he knew their story would end in tragedy. The Texas sun was cruel that morning, burning through the dust that drifted across the quiet streets of Travis County. Sheriff Darren McCall adjusted his hat and stepped out of the patrol car, the familiar smell of dry heat and oil-soaked asphalt greeting him like an old, unwanted friend. From the outside, nothing had changed. The same courthouse steps, the same townspeople tipping their hats, the same badge glinting on his chest. But inside, something was different. Something he couldn't name, except that it felt dangerous. A week had passed since Las Vegas, but Amira's voice still echoed in his head. Maybe next time you'll let me see who you really are. He couldn't shake it off. He tried burying himself in work. Traffic stops, paperwork, domestic calls. Anything to drown out the memory of her perfume and the warmth in her eyes. But every time his phone buzzed, he felt that same jolt of guilt and excitement. That afternoon, he sat alone in his office, blinds half drawn. His deputies were gone for lunch. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioner. He reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out a small metal box, locked with a tiny key. Inside were old photos, medical papers, and a driver's license that no longer existed. Danielle Marie McCall, 22, brown hair, blue eyes. A ghost of the life he'd buried 15 years ago. He stared at the photo for a long time. Danielle was smiling, shy, uncertain, but hopeful. That smile had cost him everything. His family, his church, his home. When he left Georgia in transition, he promised himself he'd never look back. He'd become someone new, strong, untouchable. But Amira had cracked that armor in one night. His phone buzzed again. A message. I can't stop thinking about you. Come back to me. No name, just an international number. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. He should delete it, pretend none of it ever happened. But he typed back anyway. You don't know what you're asking for. Seconds later, the reply came. Then, tell me. He didn't. Instead, he tossed the phone aside and leaned back in his chair, pressing his palms to his eyes. The walls of his office felt like they were closing in. That night, he drove home to his small farmhouse on the edge of town. The place was quiet, too quiet. His German Shepherd Duke wagged its tail as he entered, unaware of the storm brewing inside its owner. He poured himself a drink, opened his laptop, and stared at the email draft that had been sitting there for months. To the Board of Police Standards, I am resigning my post effective immediately. He never sent it. Instead, he minimized the screen and opened his camera app. There was a picture of him in a mirror on the balcony, her hand resting on his chest, both smiling like fools. He shouldn't have kept it, but he couldn't bring himself to delete it. The knock on the door startled him. It was Deputy Rayner, young, eager, and too observant for his own good. Evening, Sheriff. Sorry to bother you. Just wanted to remind you about the press briefing tomorrow. Yeah, Darren muttered, sliding the laptop shut. Thanks, kid. I'll be there. Rayner hesitated. You all right, sir? You look tired. I'm fine. The deputy nodded, but his eyes lingered on the half-empty bourbon bottle. All right then. Good night. When the door closed, Darren exhaled. Fine. That word was a lie he'd mastered better than any oath he'd sworn. Later, in the bathroom, he stood shirtless before the mirror. The scars across his chest were faint but still there, reminders of a past no uniform could erase. He touched them, jaw tight. Nobody needs to know, he whispered. Nobody. But deep down, he knew Amira wasn't like the others. She would keep pushing. She'd want to see him again. As the night deepened, he opened her message thread once more. You said someday you'd show me your world. Was that a lie? He typed back slowly. You wouldn't understand. Her answer came almost instantly. Try me. He stared at the screen until his reflection blurred in the glow. He knew what he was doing was reckless, but he also knew he couldn't stop. By dawn, he had booked a ticket back to Dubai. When he shut off the computer, the house fell silent again, except for the faint creak of wood and the whisper of a conscience that wouldn't let him rest. He didn't know it yet, but every mile that plane would fly was 1 mile closer to his own ruin. The heat in Dubai was different, heavier, sweeter, like it carried secrets in the air. The city pulsed beneath the desert sun, its glass towers glinting like knives. Darren stood outside the airport, sweat beading along his neck despite the dry wind. He loosened his collar and glanced at the black SUV waiting by the curb. Inside sat a driver in a crisp white dish dasher, holding a sign that read Mr. McCall. When he climbed in, the man offered a respectful nod. Ms. Alzara is expecting you at the Palm. Just hearing her name made his pulse quicken. He had told himself 100 times on the flight that he was here to end it, to explain, to say goodbye. But the lie had already taken root before he even landed. The drive took him through a city that looked unreal. Gold domes and mirrored skyscrapers, fountains leaping against a desert backdrop. It was beautiful and suffocating all at once. Just like her. When the car stopped, Amira was waiting at the entrance of her private villa on the water. A flowing crimson dress framed her figure, the sunlight catching the jewels around her wrists. She smiled as if nothing had ever gone unsaid. 7,000 miles, she said softly, walking toward him. You must have missed me more than you admit. He tried to sound calm. Or maybe I just needed answers. Her laughter was low, warm. Then come inside, Sheriff. Maybe you'll find them. Inside, the villa smelled of jasmine and sea salt. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened to a terrace overlooking the turquoise Gulf. The world felt far away. No law, no badge, no judgment. Just her. Over dinner, they spoke like two people rediscovering a dream they weren't supposed to have. She told him about the expectations that came with her bloodline, how every move, every word was measured, how even her heart was considered property of her father's empire. He listened, but part of him drifted. When she said, I envy your freedom, something inside him twisted. Freedom? He gave a short laugh. That's a word people use when they've never had to hide. Amira tilted her head. You sound like a man carrying a secret. He looked down at his glass. Maybe we all are. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was alive, thrumming with something unspoken. The air shimmered with heat, both from the night and from the pull neither could ignore. Later, they walked along the terrace, the moon turning the water silver. Amira brushed his arm with her fingers. Do you believe in fate, Darren? He hesitated. I believe in choices. Fate's just what we call the mess after. Her lips curved. Then maybe this mess is worth it. When she leaned in to kiss him, he didn't resist. The world fell away. No past, no titles, no shame. For a moment, he let himself forget everything. But in the quiet that followed, she whispered something that froze him. I'm coming to Texas next month. I want to see your world, your life. He opened his eyes. Amira, that's not a good idea. Why not? She asked, her tone playful but sharp beneath the surface. It's not what you think, he said. My world isn't ready for someone like you. She laughed softly. You mean for a woman like me? Or for the truth you're afraid I'll find? He looked away. Amira, she placed a hand on his cheek. You can trust me, Darren. I don't care what you've done or who you were before I met you. Her words cut deeper than she could know. He forced a smile, kissed her hand, and said what you wanted to hear. Then maybe someday you'll see it all. She didn't realize someday was a lie. That night, while she slept with her head resting on his shoulder, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to waves crash against the shore. The truth pressed against his ribs like a loaded gun. He could feel it coming, the unraveling, the exposure, the ruin. But when she murmured his name in her sleep, he closed his eyes and pretended for one more night that he was the man she thought he was. By morning, the sunlight spilled across her silk sheets, and Amira stirred beside him, unaware of the storm she was sleeping next to. Promise me you'll write when I leave, she said drowsily. I will, he whispered, though he knew it was another lie. Outside, the waves broke against the sand like a heartbeat. Steady, inevitable, unstoppable. He had come to Dubai to end the affair, but all he'd done was seal both of their fates. It was a quiet Thursday in Travis County when the past came knocking on Darren McCall's door, not in a metaphorical sense, but quite literally. The morning heat shimmered off the courthouse steps as he finished his patrol briefing. He had just removed his Stetson hat and reached for his coffee when Deputy Rayner burst through the office door, breathless. Sheriff, Rayner said, there's a woman outside of skin for you. Says she's from out of the country. She's, kind of a big deal. Darren frowned. What kind of big deal? Rayner hesitated. She called herself Her Excellency. The cup slipped slightly from Darren's hand, hot coffee splashing across his knuckles. Where is she? In the lobby. When he stepped out, the sight nearly stopped his heart. Amira Alzara, radiant, composed, utterly out of place, stood in the center of the sheriff's office like a queen who had accidentally wandered into a barn. The deputies nearby froze, their jaws slack as they took in sight of her silk cream dress and diamond-studded sunglasses. "Sheriff McCall," she said smoothly, ignoring the stares. "You weren't expecting me, were you?" He forced a thin smile. "Amira, this isn't exactly the place for surprise visits." "Oh, I disagree." She glanced around the room with mild amusement. "I wanted to see where the legendary sheriff of Travis County keeps the peace." He could feel every deputy's eyes drilling into him. He motioned toward his office. "Let's talk privately." Once the door shut behind them, his composure cracked. "Amira, what the hell are you doing here?" She tilted her head, unfazed. "You said someday I could see your world. Well, here I am." "That was different," he hissed. "You can't just show up here like this." Her expression softened. "I missed you, Darren. I didn't come to cause trouble. I came to see the man She hesitated, lowering her voice, care for. He turned away, staring out the window. Outside, deputies pretended to work, while sneaking glances through the glass. "You don't understand," he said. "This town isn't ready for someone like you." Amira laughed lightly. "What is that supposed to mean?" "Someone like me?" He sighed. "You're a sheik's daughter from Dubai. You don't just blend in here. People talk. Reporters dig." "So let them," she said softly. "You think I care what people whisper? You're hiding from ghosts, Darren. I just want to know who you really are." He looked at her then, really looked. The warmth in her eyes hadn't faded. The way she said his name still made his chest ache. He rubbed the back of his neck. "We can't talk here. Meet me after sunset. At my place." Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." That evening, the Texas sky bled orange and purple as Darren waited outside his farmhouse. His nerves buzzed like static. He hadn't brought a woman here since he'd built the house himself 10 years ago, a place meant for solitude, not confessions. When Amira's black sedan pulled up the gravel drive, he felt his pulse in his throat. She stepped out, barefoot in the soft dusklight, holding a small gift bag. "For you," she said, handing over. Inside was a silver compass. "So you'll always find your way back." He smiled faintly, torn between gratitude and dread. "You shouldn't have." "Maybe not," she said, walking past him into the house. "But I wanted to." The night unfolded with quiet tension. They sat by the fire, the glow flickering across her face. She asked about his childhood, his work, his loneliness. He answered in pieces, every word a careful edit of the truth. When she pressed her hand over his and whispered, "You're safe with me," his breath hitched. "You don't know what that means," he said softly. "Then show me." Her eyes held his, unwavering. "Show me who you really are." The words hung between them like a dare. He turned away, his voice rough. "Not tonight." She smiled sadly. Then, "Tomorrow." He didn't answer. He poured her another drink, hoping the bourbon would dull her curiosity and his fear. As she leaned back on the couch, laughter returning to her voice, the moment almost felt normal again. Almost. But when she excused herself to the bathroom and the house fell silent, Darren's heart began to race for reasons he couldn't explain. He stared at the flickering firelight, the compass gleaming beside the glass. Something told him that tomorrow, the tomorrow she promised, would destroy them both. Outside, coyotes howled across the fields, their cries echoing to the Texas night like a warning only he could hear. Morning came slow and golden, spilling through the thin curtains of Darren's farmhouse. The sound of cicadas hummed outside, blending with the faint clink of coffee mugs from the kitchen. Amira stood barefoot by the counter, wearing one of his shirts, her hair loose and shining in the early light. For a moment, everything looked almost normal, like they were just another couple waking up to another quiet Texas morning. Darren leaned against the doorway, watching her stir sugar into her cup. She smiled when she saw him. "You look different in daylight," she said teasingly. "Less sheriff, more human." He chuckled softly. "Don't tell my deputies that. They still think I sleep with my badge on." She walked over, placed a coffee in his hand, and looked up at him with a gentleness that disarmed him completely. You don't have to keep pretending with me. He wanted to believe that. God, he did. But belief had always been his biggest weakness. Some things are easier to pretend than explain, he said quietly. Amira studied his face, then explained, Who are you really, Darren McCall? He turned away, pretending to sip his coffee. Just a man who made too many mistakes. She touched his arm. You think mistakes scare me? I was raised among people who built empires out of lies. I'm not afraid of what you've done. I'm afraid of what you're hiding. Her words hit him like a blade. For a moment, the silence in the kitchen felt too loud. The ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, all of it pressed in on him. He tried to change the subject. You said you're leaving for Dallas tonight? Yes, but I thought, she hesitated, her tone suddenly hopeful, I thought maybe I could stay a few more days. Meet your people. See your life. He froze. That's not a good idea. She frowned. Why? Are you married? In trouble? Amira? No, tell me. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. You've built walls around yourself, Darren. And I'm not leaving until I know what's behind them. He looked down at her hand on his chest, right over the faint ridge of the scars. Panic surged through him. You don't want to do this, he said, his tone breaking. But she did. Her fingers slid down his shirt, slowly unbuttoning it before he could stop her. The air shifted heavy and electric when she opened the fabric. Her breath caught. She saw the scars first, pale, precise, running across his chest like a cruel signature. Her hand trembled as she touched them. What happened to you? He stepped back, heart pounding. You need to stop. She stared at him, confusion giving way to shock. These aren't injuries. Darren, these are... Don't. She blinked, realization dawning. You weren't born. Stop. His voice cracked, raw and desperate, but the truth was already in her eyes. You lied to me, she whispered, stepping back. All this time, you made me believe... I didn't make you believe anything, he said, voice shaking. I loved you, Amira. Every word, every look, it was real. Real, she said bitterly. You let me fall in love with a fantasy. You knew who I am, what my name means. Do you know what they'll do if this gets out? He closed his eyes. That's why I never told you. I was trying to protect you. She laughed, a sound filled with disbelief and fury. Protect me? You were protecting yourself. She turned away, her hands trembling as she grabbed her purse. You should have trusted me. I would have understood. He took a step forward. No, you wouldn't. She spun back, eyes blazing. Don't you dare tell me what I would or wouldn't do. You think I care about gender? About labels? I care about honesty. Tears stung his eyes. I wanted to tell you. I just didn't know how. She wiped her cheeks, her voice breaking. You don't lie to someone you love, Darren. Not about something like this. He reached out, desperate. Amira, please. She pulled away. No, you don't get to beg now. Her voice steadied, cold and final. I will tell the world who you really are. For a moment, the air went still, no sound, no movement, just a faint echo of her words hanging in the room like a loaded gun. Darren's breath quickened. Fear clawed at his chest, mixing with shame and rage. Don't do that, he said quietly. You don't know what you're starting. But Amira was already heading for the door. Then maybe it's time the world knew the truth. And as she stepped into the sunlight, Darren's heart sank with the awful certainty that she wouldn't live to tell it. The sound of the screen door slamming was the last thing Darren remembered before the house erupted into chaos. Amira's heels clacked across the porch as she stormed outside, her voice slicing through the humid Texas air. Do you hear me, Darren? I'll tell everyone. Her words hung in the wind like a curse. He followed her out, his heart hammering, every nerve screaming that this couldn't be happening. Amira, please don't do this, he begged, reaching for her arm. She pulled away, fury flashing in her eyes. You lied to me, to the world, she shouted. You made me love a man who doesn't even exist. That's not true, he said, voice breaking. I exist. I'm right here. Her hand trembled as she grabbed her phone from her purse. Then the world deserves to see the truth. Panic surged through him. Don't! But she had already raised the phone, her thumb hovering over the record button. You want to talk about truth? Let's tell them what their sheriff really is. He stepped forward instinctively, his hand shaking as he reached for her wrist. Stop. Amira, you don't understand what that will do. I understand perfectly, she snapped. You'll lose your badge, your town, your reputation. Maybe that's justice. Something in him cracked. Years of silence, of hiding, of pretending to be someone he wasn't. It all came crashing down. His voice lowered to a whisper. You said you saw me. You said you loved me. I loved to lie. For a moment, the world went silent except for the wind rattling through the dry grass. He stared at her, breathing hard, the air between them thick with something darker than anger, despair. Please, he said softly, don't make me lose everything I built. You already lost it, she said coldly, the moment you lied. And then, without another word, she turned her back on him. That small movement, that final rejection, ignited something inside him he couldn't control. His hand found the holster on his hip, almost without thought. The metal felt cold and heavy. Amira, he whispered, voice trembling. She froze, sensing the shift. Darren, but it was too late. The gunshot tore through the morning air, echoing across the empty fields. The birds scattered from the trees, the sound of their wings lost beneath the ringing silence that followed. For a second, he didn't move. Smoke curled from the barrel of his gun, hanging between them like a ghost. Amira staggered forward, eyes wide with disbelief. The phone slipped from her hand, landing on the porch with a dull thud. Blood bloomed across her silk dress, red spreading through white like ink and water. She looked at him, her lips trembling. Why? He stepped toward her, horrified by what he'd done. I didn't mean, oh God, I didn't mean to. Her knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground, cradling her against his chest. The life drained from her eyes as a small, broken breath escaped her lips. I'm sorry, he whispered, over and over. I'm so sorry. But she didn't hear him. Minutes passed, maybe hours, before he finally moved. He laid her gently on the floor, his hands slick with her blood. The porch boards beneath them were already stained dark. His body trembled as the reality set in. The woman who saw me, the only one who saw me, is gone. The world outside kept spinning, indifferent. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car drove by. Life continued, as if nothing had happened. Inside the house, Darren stumbled to his feet, wiping his face with shaking hands. He looked at the gun, then at her body. There was no undoing this. No prayer, no apology that could rewrite the last 30 seconds. He moved mechanically, driven by training and fear. He wiped fingerprints from the gun, set it beside her hand. He poured bourbon on the table to mimic a struggle, shattered a glass, opened the back door to make it look like an intruder had fled. When he was done, he collapsed to his knees beside her again. The world was spinning now, fast, merciless, endless. Why did you have to see it? He whispered, staring at her still face. Why couldn't you just love me blind? Her blood had soaked through his shirt. He didn't care. He pressed his forehead against hers one last time, his voice trembling through the tears. You were the only one who ever saw me, and I killed you for it. The sun climbed higher, casting light to the open doorway, illuminating the scene, a sheriff kneeling beside his secret. Surrounded by silence, the truth finally unbared in the worst way imaginable. The sirens wailed to the morning air, shattering the stillness of the countryside. Sheriff Darren McCall stood motionless on his porch as red and blue lights painted his house in chaos. His own deputies rushed past him, not yet realizing that the man standing in uniform, pale, hollow-eyed, was the killer they were searching for. Deputy Rayner knelt beside Amira's body, his voice unsteady. She's gone, Sheriff. Looks like a robbery gone bad. Doors open. Things are broken. Darren swallowed hard. Yeah, looks that way. He forced himself to sound detached, professional, while every word felt like glass in his throat. He'd rehearsed the story in his head. An intruder, a scuffle, a gunshot. It wasn't perfect, But it was something to hold on to, something to keep the truth buried a little longer. But then Detective Marcus Hill arrived. Hill wasn't just any detective. He was Darren's oldest friend, the man who'd once trained under him. A sharp mind wrapped in calm authority. Hill had a reputation for sniffing out lies like smoke. He stepped out of his unmarked car, adjusting his jacket. His eyes met Darren's, and in that moment, Darren knew he was already being read like an open book. "Morning, Sheriff." Hill said evenly, "Hell of a scene you've got here." "Yeah," Darren muttered, staring at the ground. "Hell of a scene." Hill crouched beside the body, his expression unreadable. "Pretty high-profile visitor you had." "You know her?" Darren hesitated. "Met her at a conference in Vegas. She stopped by unexpectedly." Hill glanced up, one eyebrow raised. "Unexpectedly? That's quite the coincidence." Darren stiffened. "What are you implying?" Hill stood, brushing dust off his hands. "Nothing yet, but it's strange. She checks into a hotel in town under her own name, no security detail, no press. Then she turns up dead on your porch. Doesn't add up." Darren's voice hardened. "You suggesting something, Marcus?" Hill met his gaze without blinking. "Just doing my job." As the day dragged on, forensic techs combed through the scene. Cameras clicked, gloves rustled, radios buzzed. Darren stood there silent, the symbol of authority he was supposed to be, while inside, guilt gnawed at him like rot. By evening, Hill had gathered his preliminary findings. "No sign of forced entry," he said quietly. "No fingerprints except yours and hers. Phone's broken, but looks like it was recording before the gun went off. We'll try to retrieve the footage." Darren's heart nearly stopped. "The footage?" Hill nodded. "Yeah, cloud backup maybe. We'll see what we can pull." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "You look tired, Sheriff. Get some rest. You've seen too many bodies lately." Darren forced a smile. "Yeah, too many." When Hill left, the silence in the house felt suffocating. Darren sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where Amira had stood just yesterday, laughing, alive. He tried to drink, but the bourbon only made the ghost louder. He wanted to confess. God, he wanted to tell someone. But every time he imagined the words leaving his mouth, "I killed her," he saw the headlines, the shame, the badge stripped from his chest. The world would call him a monster. Maybe they'd be right. The next morning, Hill was back, this time without warning. He entered the station where Darren sat pretending to review reports. "Got something," Hill said, tossing a folder on the desk. Inside were stills from the hotel surveillance camera in Las Vegas. Amira and Darren, laughing together in the lobby, his hand on her back. Too close, too familiar. "You want to explain this?" Hill asked quietly. Darren's throat went dry. We kept in touch after the conference. That's all." Hill studied him for a long moment. "You always told me the truth bleeds through lies eventually. Remember that?" Their eyes locked. For a second, neither spoke. Then Hill's tone softened. "You're my friend, Darren. If there's something you're not telling me, now's the time, before the evidence tells it for you." Darren forced a steady breath. "There's nothing to tell." Hill nodded slowly. "All right, but if I find out otherwise, I won't protect you." When he left, the door clicked shut, quiet but final. Darren leaned back in his chair, his pulse racing. The walls of the station felt closer now, like the truth itself was closing in on him. Outside, rain began to fall, turning the dust to mud. Through the window, he could see his reflection, the face of a man who wore the law on his chest and sin in his heart. He whispered to it, voice barely audible, "You can't hide forever." But he already knew Hill was going to find everything. And when he did, there'd be no one left to save him. The courthouse was packed, the kind of pack that happens when the town smells blood in the water. Reporters filled every row, cameras flashing like lightning. The same people who once called him our hero sheriff now whispered his name like it was a curse. State of Texas versus Darren McCall. He sat at the defense table in a gray suit, the color of ash, hands folded tight to stop the shaking. Across from him, The prosecution prepared their notes like soldiers sharpening knives. Judge Morrison presided from a bench. Stern, silver-haired, the embodiment of law and consequence. When the bailiff called the room to order, a hush fell heavy. The district attorney, Paul Harrington, rose first. His voice was calm but cold, like ice beneath a smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this is not a case of a man defending himself. This is a case of a man protecting his lie. The defendant, Sheriff Dermacall, a man sworn to uphold justice, murdered Ms. Amira Alzara in cold blood to keep his secret buried." Every word landed like a stone. Darren stared at the table, jaw clenched, unable to look up. Paul continued, "We will show that the victim had discovered his deception and threatened to expose him. Instead of facing the truth, the sheriff chose a gun. The weapon registered to him. Found at the scene. No intruder. No forced entry. Only one truth, guilt." The courtroom murmured. Then the defense attorney, Caroline Mitchell, stood, sharp-eyed, steady, and quietly fierce. "My client is not a monster," she said firmly. "He is a man who lived in fear. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of losing everything he worked for. He did not plan this. He panicked. He broke. And that makes him human, not evil." Her words gave the room pause, but Paul was relentless. Humanity doesn't erase accountability. As the trial unfolded, every secret Darren had ever buried clawed its way into daylight. The surveillance photo from Vegas. The recovered voice recording from Amira's phone. The one that captured her shouting, "I will tell the world who you are," followed by the fatal gunshot. The sound played in the courtroom like a ghost, screaming back from the grave. The jury froze. Caroline lowered her gaze, unable to watch Darren crumble. He tried to hold it together, but his breathing hitched, and before he knew it, tears burned his eyes. He whispered, almost to himself, "It wasn't supposed to end like that." Paul pounced. "You admit it then? You shot her." Darren looked up, his voice breaking. "I tried to stop her. She wouldn't listen. I loved her." Paul stepped closer, his tone like a blade. "You loved her so much you killed her?" Silence, the kind that no gavel could break. Judge Morrison finally intervened. "Counselor, that's enough." But the damage was done. The jury had seen the crack. The moment truth leaked through guilt. When it was the defense's turn, Caroline did everything she could. She spoke of trauma, of years living under the crushing weight of secrecy. She told them how the world had never been kind to people like Darren. How survival sometimes means hiding parts of yourself so deep that when they're uncovered, all you can do is lash out in fear. Her closing line was a whisper that filled the silence. "You don't have to forgive him. Just understand why." Even Judge Morrison looked away for a moment, his expression softening. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreman stood, eyes steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Darren McCall, guilty of murder in the second degree." A sound rose from the gallery. Half gasp, half sigh. Darren's body went numb. Caroline reached for his hand, but he barely felt it. His ears rang as the judge read the sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. The reporters exploded into a frenzy. Cameras flashed as deputies moved in to cuff him. His badge, the same one that once symbolized honor, glinted one last time before disappearing into the shadows of courtroom. As he was led away, he caught a glimpse of Detective Hill sitting in the back row. Their eyes met. Hill didn't look triumphant. He looked broken. Outside, thunder rolled across the gray Texas sky, echoing to the marble halls. In the holding cell that night, Darren sat alone, staring at the reflection of his shackled hands. He whispered to the darkness, "I didn't kill her because she saw what I was. I killed her because I couldn't stand losing the only person who ever did." And for the first time since the gun went off, he allowed himself to sob. Not as a sheriff, not as a killer, but as a man who finally understood that the truth doesn't set you free. It destroys you. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It beat against the windows of the county jail, like a metronome counting down the end of his life as he knew it. Darren McCall sat on the metal cot, elbows on his knees, staring at the thin stream of water leaking down the wall. His gray prison uniform hung loose on his shoulders. He was no longer the sheriff. He wasn't even Darren McCall, the man he'd spent half his life pretending to be. He was inmate number 45632, another broken soul in a system he once enforced. Detective Marcus Hill came to see him that morning. When the guards opened the door, Darren didn't lift his head. Hill walked in quietly, removing his hat, rain dripping from the brim. The two men sat across from each other, the silence between them heavy and unforgiving. "You could have told me," Hill said finally, his voice low, tired. "All those nights we worked side by side. You could have trusted me." Darren gave a faint, bitter laugh. "I've spent my whole damn life trying to be someone people could trust. You think I was going to risk that?" Hill's eyes softened. "You didn't have to be perfect, Darren. You just had to be honest." Darren looked up, his gaze hollow. "Honest men don't survive where I come from, Marcus. They get crucified." Hill studied him for a long time. "You were the best cop I ever knew," he said. "But somewhere along the line, you started policing yourself more than anyone else. That's what killed her." Darren's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to push back, but he couldn't. The truth was too sharp, too final. "She didn't deserve to die," he whispered. "Not for my shame." Hill nodded. "Then make peace with that. Don't die hating yourself." When the guard announced visiting hours were over, Hill stood. For a moment, he hesitated. "For what it's worth, I never stopped seeing you as my brother." Then he walked out, leaving Darren alone with his ghosts. Weeks later, the transfer van took him to Huntsville Penitentiary, a fortress of concrete and regret. Inside, he became a ghost among men. The other inmates recognized his face from the news. Some mocked him, others feared him. But Darren didn't fight back. He didn't talk. He just existed. Quietly, obediently, as if serving his sentence was the only way left to atone. At night, he wrote. Letters he'd never send. Words he'd never speak. Tio Amira. He began one. "You were the only one who ever saw me. I should have let that destroy me instead of you." He folded the letter carefully and placed it under his pillow beside the silver compass Amira had given him. The guards had allowed him to keep it, a small mercy he didn't deserve. One afternoon, his attorney, Caroline Mitchell, came to see him. She sat across the table, her expression unreadable. "You still writing those letters?" she asked softly. "Every night," he said. "They're all I've left." She sighed. "I filed an appeal. I don't think it'll change the sentence, but it might get you moved to a lower security unit." He smiled faintly. "Don't bother. I'm right where I belong." "Darren." "No, Caroline." His tone was gentle, final. "You did your job. I did what I did. There's no fixing that." She looked at him for a long moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "You ever forgive yourself?" He shook his head. "Forgiveness is for the living." When she left, the cell felt colder than before. That night, a thunderstorm rolled through. Lightning flashed across the narrow window, illuminating the compass in his hand. He turned it slowly, watching the needle tremble. "Still trying to find my way back," he murmured. He opened his notebook to the last page and began to write. "They call me a killer. Maybe I am. But I killed out of fear, not hate. I spent my life chasing justice for others while hiding from my own. If there's mercy left in this world, maybe it's not for me. Maybe it's for her soul. Because she loved me enough to see what I was, and I loved her enough to destroy us both." He closed the book and lay back on the cot, the thunder drowning out the sound of his breath. In the morning, a guard found him still, the compass clutched in his hand, his final note beside him. The words were smudged by tears, but one line remained clear. "There's no freedom in lies, not even behind bars." And for the first time, Sheriff Darren McCall looked peaceful, as if he'd finally stopped running from himself. It was a cloudless morning when Detective Marcus Hill returned to the small cemetery outside Travis County, the same patch of land where so many lawmen had been buried, their names etched beneath flags and polished badges. But Darren McCall's grave was different. No badge, no glory, just a flat headstone of gray granite that read, "Darren McCall, 1981, 2025 truth buried in silence." Hill stood there for a long time, his hat held over his heart. The air was still except for the rustle of live oaks swaying gently in the distance. He'd seen plenty of deaths in his career, but this one stayed with him, not because of how Darren died, but because of how long he'd been dying before that. The wind carried the scent of rain and dust as he spoke softly to the grave. You always said the badge was your armor. Guess none of us ever saw how heavy it was, huh? He knelt, placing a small metal compass beside the stone, the one retrieved from Darren's cell. The same compass Amira had given him, still faintly scratched with her initials. It had taken months of red tape to get it released from evidence. Now, it rested where it belonged. She saw you, Darren, Hill whispered, even when you couldn't see yourself. Behind him, footsteps crunched through gravel. A woman's voice broke the quiet. Detective Hill? He turned. A young journalist stood there, clutching a notebook. Eva Morales, from the Dallas Tribune. Her eyes carried that mix of curiosity and empathy that good reporters never quite learn to turn off. I didn't mean to intrude, she said. I'm writing a feature about the McCall case, the man behind the badge. People still talk about him. Hill gave a tired smile. Yeah, they always will. Do you think he was a monster? She asked gently. He hesitated, then shook his head. No, he was a man who ran from the truth until it ran him down. You can call that weakness. Or just call it human. She scribbled his words, then looked toward the grave. Do you think he ever found peace? Hill's gaze lingered on the stone. If there's any justice left in the world, I hope so. But peace and forgiveness aren't the same thing. Eva closed her notebook. I read the letters he wrote. The ones his lawyer released after the ruling. They were haunting. Hill nodded. He always didn't know how to write the parts of himself he couldn't say out loud. She studied him for a moment. Why do you still come here? He looked at the compass again, glinting in the morning light. Because I knew both of them, the man he wanted to be and the one he couldn't hide. And maybe coming here reminds me that truth isn't clean. It's messy, it's painful, and sometimes it kills the people who dare to live it. They stood in silence for a while. Finally, Eva said quietly, I'm going to Dubai next month. I want to visit Amira's grave. Her family is letting me write about her, too. Maybe it'll help people see this wasn't just a scandal. It was a tragedy. Hill smiled faintly. Tell her story right then. Don't make her a victim or him a villain. Just make them human. I will, she promised. She started to leave but turned back one last time. Detective, do you still believe in love after everything you've seen? He thought for a moment, eyes drifting to the horizon where sunlight bled through the clouds. I believe in it, he said finally. I just don't trust it anymore. When she was gone, Hill stood alone again. The sky had brightened, painting the headstone in gold. He reached out, brushing dust off the engraved words. You got your silence, partner, he said softly. Hope it's the peace you wanted. He straightened, placed his hat back on, and turned toward his car. As he walked away, the wind picked up, rustling through the grass. The compass shifted slightly, its needle trembling before settling, pointing true north. Miles away, in Dubai, a caretaker laid fresh jasmine over Amira Alzar's marble grave. Her epitaph bore no title, no scandal, just 5 simple words. She loved him. He broke. And across 2 continents, 2 names carved in stone told one unfinished story. Not a murder or deceit, but the unbearable cost of hiding who you are. The world had already moved on. But beneath the Texas sky, the truth, like the desert wind, still whispered their names.